letters to the 7 churches. Before we take the second church, let us go back to that first church we did, Ephesus. What name would you give that church? I said we will think a name that will describe it according to the message. Have you thought of it? What name, what adjective can we describe that church? Church that lost its first love. Or if you want it just brief, the backslidden church. The backslidden church. Ephesus, the backslidden church. Now this is Smyrna we are doing. We'll also have an adjective for this so that we remember later on when we look at the 7 churches what characterizes each church. Today the second church, its message 5, it is called the church in Smyrna. You saw that was very close to Ephesus. Here the Jews were very rich and very influential. But the Christians were very afflicted and very poor. And so the Jews were very hostile to the Christians. And they persuaded the Romans also to persecute them. So in this church particularly, they're going through a lot of persecution and trials, both from the Jews and from the Romans. And so we find a lot of martyrdom, people who had to lay down their lives for Jesus Christ. Now, as we look again at this church, it had the safest of all harbors. It was a beautiful city. It was the loveliest of all the cities. It was called the Crown of Asia. It was destroyed in 600 BC and rebuilt again 400 years later. It became the center of emperor worship. You know what that means? Caesar or you die. Caesar or Christ. If it is Christ, we die. If it is Caesar, then you live. And so we find that this was the condition of this church. As it was a lot of martyrdom and a lot of persecution. The story is particularly told about a very, very godly bishop there called Polycarp. He was 86 years old, faithfully serving the Lord, preaching the word and encouraging the Christians in their sufferings. And he was giving pastoral care. Now, the Jews and the Romans, they wanted to kill him. And so one slave girl, for sake of money, monetary gain, or whatever benefit, she betrayed Polycarp where he was. And so they came. And it is told that when these soldiers came to take him to burn him at the stake, he was so kind to them. He even fed them, gave them food, because he said he must be tired and hungry. He provided food for them, and then he went with them. He was put at the stake, and he was burnt. But his life, his testimony, his kindness to the soldiers made a great impact. In fact, the testimony of these Christians began to be reflected and created a very good influence on their persecutors. We are told here in the Bible that this church was going through a lot of afflictions and poverty. This word affliction in Greek means under tremendous pressure, literally crushed beneath a weight. That is the kind of affliction they were going through. And poverty says complete destitution. Many of them were just slaves. So this church, how does Christ present himself? We see him describe himself in verse 8. The first and the last who died and came to life. How do you think this message will encourage that church who was persecuted, who was martyred? He's saying, I'm the first and the last. I hold all things together. I'm all in all. And I am the one who died and will come to life. You are dying, but you will come to life because I died and came to life. So this is how Christ is presented. And then we find here that there is, the commendation is, I know your afflictions and your poverty, yet you are rich. Christ's evaluation of who we are, what we do, is so different from the way the world evaluates us and the way that even we evaluate ourselves. He said, you may be poor, you may be afflicted, the society may think you are just the scum of the earth, but to me, Christ says, you are rich. And then he says, I know not only their affliction, the slander of those who say they are Jews. Jews are supposed to worship Jehovah God, but they are not. They belong to the synagogue of Satan. When I had read this, it was so frightening. Can you imagine? They think they belong to Jehovah, they are worshipping Jehovah, but they are actually worshipping Satan. And they belong to his synagogue, not to God's. What deception, what self-deception we have. So do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. And he tells them, see, there is no condemnation. Out of the 7 churches, only 2 churches have no condemnation. This is one of them. He doesn't condemn them at all. And he says, you're going to suffer some more. Usually when trials come, they don't just come and go, they come one after, they pile one on top of the other so that God can finish his work of refining and work in our lives. So he said, you're going to suffer some more, you will be put into prison, and you go through terrible suffering, and but you need to be faithful even to the point of death. And to those, the promise, I give you the crown of life. Now you don't have a crown, nothing at all. But I will give you a crown of life if you are faithful. This is to the Smyrna church. And he says, he who overcomes also will not be overcome by the second death. The first death is our physical death. Then there's a second death, our spiritual death, final judgment. And that's a second death from which is for eternity, ever and ever. He said, you will not go through that. And so this is a message to the Smyrna church. Small church, it's poor, it's afflicted, but in God's Christ's eyes, it is rich. And he has only praise for this church, encouragement for them to continue. What will we describe this church? We will call it the suffering church. Today too, there are areas in our country, in all the nations, where there is so much of persecution for the faith, where pastors and Christians lay down their lives rather than deny Christ. And their churches are burnt and their families are murdered. To them, the message here is relevant. They're not to be afraid, but because he's going to give a crown of life, and they will not be touched by the second death. God has not promised skies always blue, flower-strewn pathway all our lives through. God has not promised sun without rain, joy without sorrow, peace without pain. But God has promised strength for the day, rest for the laborer, light for the way, grace for the trial, help from above, unfailing sympathy, undying love. If there are some who are listening, or going through trials, or maybe suffering, affliction, poverty, this is a message of comfort for you. Christ is with you, and his power, his strength is with you, and great will be your reward one day. Persecution and suffering do not destroy, but strengthen and purify the people of God. Gracious Father, Suffering is never wasted in your hands. They make us better and they make us more refined, purer, more acceptable to you. Thank you for loving us enough to see us through our trials and suffering. Encourage, strengthen each one that is going through trial today.